Welcome, everybody. We are joined here with Gina and Erin, and they represent Spring Aqua System, which is the water filtration system that I've recently been geeking out about and talking about on my social media and to my patients. Because I got one myself, and we just briefly talked about it right before we hit record. How I have been testing water filtration systems, water systems for a very long time and have many different types of units. And I always felt like there was always something missing between, one versus another. And I feel like with the Spring Aqua system, I finally found something that I'm completely satisfied with and has checked all the boxes for me. So we're here to talk and have a casual conversation about this topic about water, about structured water, all the energetic properties of water, how it relates to human health and optimization. And we can also talk about, the Spring Aqua system and sort of the idea and the wisdom behind it. So welcome, Gina. Welcome, Erin. Thank you for taking the time for being here.
Glad to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah.
Yes. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the Spring Aqua system, like what it's about, how it came to be, what's kind of like the brief story behind it, and what is it doing for us?
Yeah, for certain. So I was a customer of Spring Aqua for, I guess, about 2 years before I started working with the company. So I've been with them now for 2.5 years. And my background's regenerative agriculture. So my whole, idea of a career was all around biomimicry through biodynamic agriculture, nutrient density through the foods that, we grow in a healthy environment through the soil that, farms have. And I used to live on a farm in my 20s and I had an amazing spring. So my barometer for hydration just really was dialed in. And then I moved to Asheville, North Carolina, got on city water, and I was like, oh no, what am I going to do now? So I got a whole house filter and I'm still not going to drink the water, but at least I had a whole house filter. I would travel 3.5 hours round trip with my kids with glass carboys, go to a local spring, and it was a lot of work, just it was a really big dedication of mine. So after a little while, I found out about Spring Aqua, and just like you said, it matched all the check marks for me because not only did it have really sophisticated filtration, which was important because we know there's a lot of stuff in water that we don't want to have, in our bodies. But this idea of mimicking an ecosystem or the biomimicry of how does nature create the most, hydrating, pristine waters, and how can we honor the nature of water? And to find a company that did this was like, all right, I'm checking it out. So I did a couple of calls with them and I did some research, and basically after the water is cleaned, the difference between like an RO, which takes everything out, which takes the minerals out and everything out, which can be good under certain circumstances, it's not as hydrating. But what this does through non-electrical infrared frequencies of certain crystals, just like you would find in the earth, and then centrified minerals, which are brought to 1,000 degrees Celsius, so there's no impurities in it, it gives back that fourth phase, which Gina knows so much about and will be able to speak very eloquently to. But that's where you get that hydration, that mouthfeel, that wonderful taste that we all associate with a really good spring water. And I wasn't looking at the time for hydrogen. I didn't really know much about hydrogen, but I learned a lot at that point about the stabilized molecular hydrogen, how it's the Earth's most abundant form of antioxidants. And, I'm going to be 50 in 2 years, and having extra antioxidants is helpful. So that's kind of like the basics of how I got in and what's so cool about the system compared to just being a filter.
I I I love that, you touched on the ecosystem part because I don't think that's a term that's not really thrown around much. And it's really a different philosophy and idea, right? It's not just water filtration, which is like RO, taking out the bad things in there, right? But you're talking about an ecosystem, which sounds to me like almost like a living thing, right?
Mhm.
Like we're treating water not like an inanimate object, but it's actually a living thing versus, like, for instance, sometimes in my world, I do a lot of nutrition. So I have to educate between the difference between like a synthetic vitamin that's created in a lab versus something that comes from food, which is very different. And on paper, they might look the same. Maybe it's vitamin A, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin C, but in in its own energetic structure, it is very different. How the body takes it in is very different, right? How it gets made is very different, and its ratios are very different. So, is there a different quality to, the water that is going through the Spring Aqua system versus, like an RO or distillation, or other types of filtration?
Yeah, well, one thing is when the quantum physicist Dr. Henry and our engineers were creating this, they did look at the hydrology and geology of some of the top springs in the world. And most people know about like the Lord Spring in France, but there's another one in Germany and the one in the Himalayas. And yeah, so, they didn't want any electricity to the system. And that's important. That's a difference than RO has or a lot of other systems out there where they're electrocuting the water, denaturing it. This was all about how to mimic what Mother Nature does through that hydrology, through that geology, and really put the pieces together to solve how do we treat water the way it wants to be treated in nature, even though we live in these modern day societies with right angled pipes and municipal water that's been chemically treated and things like that. So yeah, there is an enlivening process of these infrared frequencies that emit, into the water. And then also just the wonderful minerals. Like you're definitely after my own heart because coming from the perspective of biodynamic agriculture, which was a answer to industrialization, like farming becoming like a factory back during the Industrial Revolution. Everything began to become siloed on farms and animals were pulled off of it and inputs were, given. And so you look at how humanity over just the last 100 years has treated water, has treated farming, and what a detriment we've had in mineral quality of our food, and a detriment we've had to the hydration of our bodies. And so, yeah, this is definitely about enlivening it back, giving it back its memory, of how it would be if it was bubbling up in a spring. So I'd say that's probably a good thing. Do you have anything to add, Gina?
I think talking about ecosystems is really important. I'm an anthropologist, and so I was looking at um, the many ways that the indigenous were using water enhancement strategies around the world. Looking at indigenous traditions around the world and through history and ancient ways to actually bring water into like its full life. I saw that there were some very, very specific ways that were practiced around the world, and those involved running water over things like banana leaves that allowed them to have a biological touch. Putting tea into water allows water to generate a whole nother level um, of electrical or voltage quality in the water to make it more enlivening to everything it's around. Things like clays, which were used even with the Neolithic people, would carry clay pellets with them to help enhance, cleanse, and create water energy when they would travel. And when I came across Spring Aqua and I saw the strategies they were using to clean and energize water, I knew immediately they were practicing an ecosystem that didn't involve additional electricity, which has its own set of problems. Those are man-made inputs that really change how water creates this kind of enlivening passage of energy to our biological system. So not only I'm talking about the ecological system of things like trees and crops and plants and soils, but also what does that look like once it enters our own biological system? And that matchup is a rare and beautiful thing when you actually get the kind of water that matches the water inside of our very cells. So the body doesn't have to do the work of trying to change the water organization so it can come into our cells, pass our membranes. Instead, there's a natural mass match, and that makes a huge difference in our health and our vitality, our capacity to heal, and literally what our tissues are made of, right?
Gina, the you mentioned the electrical problem,
Mm.
which there's different systems out there that will run. You have to plug it into the wall, right?
Right.
It could be a water filtration system. It could be like a hydrogen machine,
Hmm.
right? And you have to plug it into the wall. And there's electronics in there that is making hydrogen or it's doing something to it. Like what? Why is that different? Why is that, maybe not as good for the human body?
Right. I'm glad you asked that because when you plug it into the wall, you now have an overriding kind of electricity that's man-made that interferes with these incredibly subtle electrical signals or electromagnetic signals that the cells are using to speak back and forth in your interior systems, between your brain and your heart, between your eyes and your brain, every system, your cardiac system, your lymph system. These are all very subtly communicating through electromagnetic fields, along with the moistening that water does. So, water isn't only just this material that moistens us, and it's not only the actual gas that we run on, it is the fuel we run on water, but it's also these very subtle informational signals which orchestrate a whole biology inside of us, including the conversation with our microbiome. Like there's electromagnetic conversations going on between our cells and our microbiome as well, and it's all run on hydration. It's all run on the quality of the water and its ability to pass information back and forth between different species inside of us, different cell systems, different organ systems. And so once you plug that all into a wall, you brought in a whole chain of harsher communications and electrical information that really is difficult. And so we definitely don't want to treat our water with electricity. That's one reason why I think Spring Aqua is unique in allowing these natural minerals and this crystal flow without just a gravity fed system, just like we see in biology and ecology.
So it's essentially mimicking nature. It's cutting a piece out of nature, right? And going like, well, the water flows in a spring. The water flows in this way, going through different terrains, different minerals, soil, rock, etc. Right? And through that process, does that like structuring process, which is, I think for most people, that's a almost a difficult concept to grasp, and maybe because we're talking about things in the quantum world and it's a higher level physics. But what is the idea of structured water structuring? You mentioned the fourth phase of water, like what is that all about?
Well, I'll try to make it really clean and simple because it isn't really difficult once you understand that water molecules are tumbling around and they're in a very chaotic state. And then they begin this process. They're on a spectrum where and vapor looks like that. They're going from vapor to liquid, which is a more organized, more orderly state. We get a sense that vapor is more disorganized than liquid because we can see the feature of a more dense form of water. Then you have the next thing on that we're taught in our science classes is the next thing on the spectrum is ice. And that's a very, structured form. It's very clear that that's a whole different density of water. But what Gerald Pollack in his work in the University of Washington identified was a whole part of this spectrum where water is in a crystalline state. It's not yet frozen, but it's even more organized. So it has like this snowflake, but not tight yet, not stuck. It's actually in amazing motion, and these crystals are exactly what transmits the most information with the least amount of static. So the difference between liquid water and hydrating with liquid water, and the difference between hydrating with water that's more orderly or structured or organized is that electrical signal, which is how we do run a high performing system, a high repair system, a system that has energy to go to, our 80s and our 90s in good health. That's it's not that hard once you just put it on the spectrum and recognize, okay, I get that those changes can happen. And each one of them does better work at conducting information in the body. That's really the frontier of water research right now.
Yeah, that's beautiful. When you talk about, energy, electricity, and all those things, I just can't help but think about the mitochondria, right? How in our cells, and we have trillions, if not quadrillion, mitochondria in our body, and essentially that's like the engine that runs our cells, and making energy. That's actually just one thing it does, but there's actually like an energetic connection, and through an information connection, I guess, where cells communicate with each other via the mitochondria, but at the same time, like I think we also communicate with the outside world, with other organisms, with other living things.
Yeah.
Some
That.
people may even you know theorize like mitochondria and our connection to the quantum world, and to quantum field, or even the connection to God, right, is through our mitochondria. And so there's a lot of work and data in that realm to suggest that. But I think of, as a practitioner, as a clinician that sees people with autoimmune issues, chronic illness, all these people with a lot of health issues. I can't help but think that, what's going on? What are all the factors that are contributing to that? Could it be the water that people are drinking? How it's essentially, some people like to use the term dead water. Do you think that that's the right term to use? That, water that people are drinking out there, it's essentially dead, or, not alive. There's no living energy to it. Is that correct to say? You guys think?
I think it's a little bit hard. I'll just jump in, Erin, and just get a quick answer to this. I think it's a little bit hard for people to understand the word dead or living. What I'd really like to share, to help organize people's thinking around this and make it more sense, is we are made of water, but it's not in liquid form. That's why we aren't sloshing around like a bag of water. We are water in a denser gel-like, literally plasma form. And so every one of our cells is a little tiny plasma package, and then they all line up together. And that's called our tissue and our organs. And even more, the mitochondria inside every one of those little plasma packs is also a tiny little bag of plasma. And that plasma water is what generates the whole capacity for organization and liveliness, energy and information. But people drink water and think, well, I'm still alive. So what's going on here? And it's partially to help people understand when you drink the difference between drinking water in a plasma-like state, a more viscous state, a more gel-like state, and a straight up liquid, is that your body has to do the energetic work of translating that liquid water into the plasma state. That takes a lot of energy from your system. So when you're actually giving it something, it doesn't have to do all that work to. Now you have additional energy for repair, recovery, and resilience for living in the kind of world we live in, where there's insults coming on all the time with EMFs or pesticides or stress, you name it. That plasma is much more buoyant and resilient. So when you say dead water, people are like, well, how come I'm not dead if I'm drinking dead water? I just want to help. Yeah, work that goes in there that takes up a tremendous amount of our healing energy and our literally buoyancy and optimism for life. So that's how I would frame that.
Yeah, I like to say blank slate water,
Mm.
like it's just a blank slate. But also, I've had a lot of clients that we've spoken with, and I had this one gentleman, he's like, man, when I was drinking RO water, it was like, it's an oxymoron. It was like dry water. He's like, I just could never feel hydrated. And I'm like, yeah. One thing about structured water is that it's shown to be 10% more voluminous by weight, and the literature that we have, it's 2 to 3 times more hydrating when it's in that structured state. So think about RO water, you're drinking 2 to 3 cups. And if you're just drinking 1 cup of structured water, that's, the equal of hydration. And then what you were saying about the body has to do all that work, then what happens to the rest of the water? Because you don't transform all of that water, then you end up urinating it out and losing minerals and all kinds of things like that, and just never really feeling hydrated. I really do feel lucky that I had that spring when I first moved to Western North Carolina. It was just a blessing. I grew up with my grandmother being a very holistic farmer. They were homesteaders. They canned. They grew everything organically. She was spiritual. Even though she was Catholic, she was more spiritual than she was religious. Even she went to church every Sunday. But I think it was her guiding of my soul that led me to a more natural lifestyle in the beginning. And the water that I had on my farm was so pristine. My greenhouses were on it and everything. And so yeah, my body knew, because I would try to drink other water, and I have a very sensitive palate. I've tried springs all over the world, and some springs I like more than others. But you can definitely feel a difference. And that was what I was excited about when I got my Spring Aqua. Like, one, I'm not traveling, long distances to a spring that I like. There was one in Bryson City. It's coming right from my tap. And I knew one of the things that got me with the springs, because when I was director of business development at Demeter, we did like a scientific research with Wine Spectator on glyphosate in wines, right? And they looked at conventional wines, which of course you're going to think is going to have glyphosate in it, and organic and biodynamic. And organic and biodynamic both have, principles to, avoid glyphosate, but it was showing up in the wines, even in small amounts, in the higher certifications, because of the rainwater. And the one I used to go to in Bryson City, I used to love that spring, and I slowly started to feel like maybe this isn't the best. And I think it was more and more people were moving in, and who knows what they're spraying on the ground and things. And I wasn't too certain that I had the best water. And so now with Spring Aqua, like, I know the level of cleanliness, and I know the principles behind it are matching what is my ethos for the type of water that I would like to be drinking and having my family drink. And so, yeah, that was a big game changer.
The you mentioned you mentioned the higher density water, and I think so. When I drink the Spring Aqua water, there is a noticeable difference in how it feels in your mouth. Right? There's almost like this. You can truly feel the thickness of it or viscosity of it, right? And it's interesting because it's like if you pour a liter of water, right, and versus another one which is also like RO, for example, which is only a liter of water, in volume it's the same, but the feeling is different. Like, how do we explain that?
Well, again, this liquid crystalline or plasma state of water, uh, it's it is actually a heavier weight water. And it's a more concentrated form of water. The first time I talked to Jerry Pollock, he didn't know who I was. I hardly knew who he was. I called him up because I was looking at how desert communities were hydrating without liquid. They should be dead without 8 glasses a day. Everybody knows this, you've got to have 8 glasses. And I would be in these desert communities going, well, they're not drinking 8 glasses of water a day. Where are they getting their hydration? And it was a slow process to uncover that they were actually getting water out of cactus and aloe and tubers and dates. And as I began to look around the globe and find out what their hydrating foods were, identify them, each of them had this sort of jelly like quality. And it was that jelly like quality, this more thick and thickened form, that I finally called Gerald Pollack. I said, "Hey, no, none of my colleagues know what I'm talking about. Would you happen to know why these foods are seem to be far more hydrating than people who are carrying water bottles around all the time and what our modern world looks like. And he said, yeah, that's concentrated water. And I was like, it can't be that simple. Are you telling me there's water locked in plants that is more hydrating for us than seeking water out in, lakes and streams and so forth? And that was a really seminal conversation for me. It was why I founded the Hydration Foundation, to help people have this idea that we have got to take our hydration seriously, and we have to find better ways to hydrate. Certainly now more than municipal water systems, which we just are seeing are completely contaminated. So that denser form of water, molecularly denser, hydrogen bond connected, and in this plasma form, is going to go directly into our cells. Our cell membranes are ready to receive this water and the information it carries. And it's a perfect match. Instead of a lighter liquid coming in and having to be translated, touched with minerals, there's a lot of work, as I said, that happens to get the liquid stage into this denser form, which is what our body really runs on and what our tissues are made out of naturally. So, yeah, that was kind of a long explanation, but I think that heavier water, denser water, more concentrated water, and of course, you have to drink less, right? You do not have to drink as much. And that's also very valuable, because when we're drinking the liquid water, not only does our body have to do the energy of changing it into the appropriate state, but that water will wash through us very quickly, like a flash flood, and take out minerals, electrolytes, and nutrients, the very thing we need to preserve our ability to translate that. So it's a great it's a great modern hack, modern technology to for us to cope with. We live in houses. We got to have nobody's riding to the springs anymore. So having that under your sink, gravity fed, through its own mineral contents. We haven't talked about the fact that Spring Aqua is also the only company that I've worked with, and I do work with many companies, but Spring Aqua customizes the minerals and the filters for your region or your zip code. That is a whole nother part of this ecological system, which I think is very telling about how sensitive they're trying to be to how all of this works like nature does. So, Erin, do you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, thank you, Gina. That was something that I found interesting too. And Dr. Calvin, when you came into the system, you filled out your zip code, and if you're on city water or well water, if you already have a whole house 5 micron filtration installed, if you have a water softener, all those are details that we have an internal system that was built out in advance. So we have access to all the municipal water data, and we do have clients all over the world, from Hong Kong to Australia to Philippines to Brazil, all over Europe. And so when someone fills that out, that lets us know if you're on city water, what type of water you have. And it goes through an internal rating system that then gives a customized quote to say what type of products will be the best for your area. When somebody's on a well, we need to see a well report because we don't have access to that data. And, anything can be in a well, but it is, water is different everywhere. And trying to just put a like a blanket over that it's all the same isn't. I just think it's a lot smarter this way, to work this way. And that's how the filtration is set up. So that if you're living in a softer water area where maybe there's not as much particulates, then the sophisticated smaller filters will be fine. If you're in an area where there's a lot more particulates, or if you have very old pipes in your house and corrosion is coming through, then you're going to need some pre-filters if you don't have a whole house filtration, just to keep the longevity of those really good filters in place. So, yeah.
I think let's talk about you sparked something that I thought about, which is what about the water that's being used on our food, on our crops? When you go to Whole Foods, when you go to Sprouts, when you go to the grocery stores and you're trying to buy like the highest quality organic food, what about where that food comes from at that farm and the water that they're using to water those crops. You know, do you think that people are using what kind of water are people using? Are they using spring water? Are they using well water, or is
Yeah.
it RO?
Yeah, so if you went to demeter-usa.org, or if you went to Demeter International, you can look at the farm standard. And just like the NOP, National Organic Program, has its standard for farming practices, there's a difference between biodynamic food and organic in the fact that there's processing standards. And within the farm standard and on a biodynamic farm, they do talk about water. I've never seen that in an organic certification. What a farmer does themselves because of what they believe in or what access they have to water, that will be, of course, up to their own farm plan. But yeah, in the biodynamic community, they're very particular about the chlorine and different things like that. So you can look at that farm standard, which is a great agronomic principle, that lays down how do you create a farm without having external inputs. How do you create health and vitality in the living system of that ecosystem that you're on farming? So it's a really beautiful gift to humanity. But when it comes to the processing standards, organic only has one processing standard. And you said Whole Foods, like they were the first, grocery store to be certified organic, even though they don't have all organic, products in there. I don't know what that really means, but yeah, what you're putting on it, that's definitely going to, that would be a slight concern. I think my more concern would be how is that tomato that's 80% water? What type of water is that getting? And that's actually what led me to Spring Aqua after I became a customer, as I met Gina and I met Kenny, and I did a consultation, like a little consulting job on an agricultural device that we were planning to come out with this year, and we're having to wait right now because of the tariff structures, to until we bring it out. But it was all about how do we get structured water onto the farmscape, because the vision of Spring Aqua is to, restore water for people and planet, and that's a really big mission, and we need everybody to be a part of that. And what better place than in the farm, landscape. But yeah, with the processing standards I was talking about, they have 18 different processing standards when I was at Demeter, depending on the type of agricultural product that's used so that the least amount of manipulation happens. The NOP has one standard, like the Lord of the Rings, that rules them all. So it is interesting. And that's how I came into this world, is because I always thought, like, wow, farming is so important. And I got interested in nutrient density in 2017. I was up in Boston and heard about this nutrient density thing through the Bionutrient Food Institute and Association. And they were doing tests on, food with a spectrometer, a handheld spectrometer. And so I really got into this idea of, like, wow, if the work that I do on the planet is giving people, more minerals, more vitality, we can have more geniuses on the planet, their own personal genius, not IQ genius, but I mean, what the spiritual context of why you're on planet Earth, to be alive, to be awake, to be a whole person. And it's funny because I spent so many years, about 20 years in agriculture, but my personal journey was always around water. And when I had the opportunity to meet Gina and Kenny, and to start working in water, that was just like it was a whole nother level, because to me, I think water is probably the most important for all of our biological systems, for earth, for body, and yeah. So I don't know if I really answered that, but you do have to be, really considerate about how much water is in an orange, how much water is, in an apple, which is structured water. Like Gina was saying, nature produces structured water, and that's why people feel more hydrated when they're eating leafy greens or fruits, or that's why I take lemons and oranges on the plane, so that I can get some structured water when they won't let you bring your water through TSA. But yeah, I would say watching for that is good. But of course, the outside of the water, the skin usually is a protectant on most foods. You can wash that with a simple baking soda and a solution to get any of the waxes off, or things that you might not want to ingest. But it's really that internal structure of the foods that we eat that is important to me.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm wondering is, the if we were to water our crops, our food, with terrible water, you know, I think when people assay it, maybe they don't see a nutritional difference, right? The content of the nutrition may not be different, but I think there are things that maybe I don't know, maybe I don't know if we can measure it just yet with our technology. Is the how's the quality of it, the energetic quality of that food. And when we eat it, the same way how, that when you drink reverse osmosis, water or distilled water, or water that's just, not structured, how it doesn't feel as hydrating. Could the plants be feeling the same way and create more stress for the plants? And when we eat that, what is it doing to our bodies, right? Could we make the plants and the food that we eat, and it's not just us, it's also the animals too. The animals eat the plants as well too. But at least I would say with animals, like, when you have cow or chicken and whatnot, there's rainwater, and so that's that's watering the pasture. So that's structured. But with like the lettuce and the tomatoes, and the fruits, if we watered with non-structured water, with a lower quality water, and we had like, could that affect its nutrition? Could that affect how nourishing it is for the body? Could that maybe even stress our bodies out, right? If we were to eat that, I guess I don't know if there's an answer to that,
Yeah,
but
there
I think
sure is. And we'll
oh,
turn it
there is.
around. Say, what does it look like when we are farming with structured water? And we're seeing amazing ways to document the value to the plant, the value to the nutrition of the fruit or the crop. But even more exciting, Dr. Calvin, is the value to the microbes in the soil. They now are getting adequate hydration, and they actually are doing the work of breaking down the minerals and creating new soil density, aeration. Everything that we need to recover our soils from monocropping can be addressed simply by changing the phase of the water that we irrigate with. I mean, this is so we are on the edge of some very big changes. And our initiative at the Hydration Foundation is exactly this. One of the most important work that we do is how to get structured water back into irrigation in our farming. And in your own communities, if you have a spring aqua system and you have a house system and you can water your garden and your garden is definitely going to produce a higher quality, nutritious fruit or crop for you, along with the densities, right, of the soils that you're rebuilding. This then leaks out to your neighbors. This begins like the stretch that water can do if we get out of the way and let water be what it was always meant to be, without chemically washing it and jamming it through pipes. And it needs lots of twirls to do the spiral. And that's the rainwater that falls, the way that water moves through the spring aqua system. These are spiral strategies that have long been documented as the way water recovers itself, cleans itself, purifies itself, re-energizes itself, and then returns itself to all the other things that are living. It's very exciting work where we're really happy to. And Kenny, of course, I came into that story with Kenny in part because of our care for our concern around agriculture. And, can you guys make an agricultural device? Would you consider that as part of your plan to, bring better hydration to people in their houses? And that's been a wonderful project. I love working with I love working with companies they're about the bigger story than just, you know, um, sales. This is completely why I've been involved with Kenny for so long. It's great.
Yeah, a more spiritual, path, really.
We didn't say anything about the spiritual work of water because it is a living entity created by our creator to be the way we get our electricity and our vitality, our the breath of life, as actually the vapor in that is water. Water is the way that nature works and that our creator has given us. So I'd like to give a really quick example, which is we know from clinical studies that when you're dehydrated by just 2%, your cognitive function goes down. And trying to bring people's level of hydration back up, just that 2% is going to, be like a whole spiraling recovery. But I'm always aware that when I see well hydrated people, there's a whole dimension of access to conversations with the divine, to being the fuller potential of what our creators made us to be. Absolutely. And that is true for all indigenous cultures. They're already in that conversation because of hydration and their reverence for water.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think it really takes us beyond just a conversation of, chemistry, biochemistry, which is like, okay, well, H2O, right? and or eating fruits and eating plants, and you're like, okay, here's some vitamins, here are some minerals. It takes us way beyond that conversation to take us into the spiritual, into
Mhm.
something that is, I wouldn't want to say abstract, but it's higher level,
Mhm.
um, because we're not made of just these chemicals and these chemical bonds, these elements, take the periodic table and smash it together. And then here we are. Like there's got to be so much more than that. Otherwise, we could recreate that in a lab. But the fact that we can't tells us that there is this spiritual, this energetic component about it. And I think doing the things like it's reconnecting is what I think of it when you say that. When you're drinking like living water, you're connecting to, life, what real life is about. Which sort of reminds me of like the movie The Matrix, right? Which is like you're almost like in this different world, and there's actually a real world on top of that. And you're just connecting back to that real world, so it's very interesting there. I'm
I
sure that's
want to make
a good campfire talk.
yes, that would be. When you're talking about like just the physiology of like minerals and all that stuff, there's a gentleman. He's a scientist and researcher. His name is Dr. John Fagan, and I met him through the nutrient density work. And he actually was able, and you can go look up his work, to identify that there is so much more in food. And he calls it nutritional dark matter because we don't know what it is. So that to me was just like, wow, like we know what we know. And I don't think it's very much.
That's very interesting. There because I think what's interesting is, in research, right? We often will look at the data and go and then have this feeling. Maybe it's a human quality of us is we look at something and then we automatically think, okay, we figured it out. That's the end all be all. We figured it out. This is a new discovery, and we have now proven or disproven, what we theorized in the past. And then this is it. This is what we currently know. And then there's sort of a part of us that rejects anything outside of that or anything that could be further from that. And I just go, well, before you made that discovery, before we learned about that, we didn't know about it. So how can we just reject it? And I think of like, where people might be skeptical of things like, energetic work or the spiritual component, because all that sounds very airy fairy, sounds ethereal. It sounds like it's, how can that be? Water is water. What I'm looking at is it's the same thing. So I don't think that there's a deep understanding, or maybe like an openness with certain people. And I would just like to invite them to basically accept the consider that, we just don't know it all, and we're constantly finding new ways of learning more about our ecosystem, learning more about ourselves, learning about more about science. And who knows, we're in maybe the next 10 years, we would look back and go, we knew nothing, and that's how I think how we feel today with the new discoveries of quantum biology, quantum physics, etc. Is that there's so much that we realize we didn't know, even just 10 years prior, right?
Yeah, I feel that that's the exciting thing growing up. I always felt that science and spirituality was actually the same language. It was just people's translation of it. And as more and more came out on quantum physics, quantum biology, energy medicine, scalar, just all these wonderful things that I've seen people heal from. And it's it really shows, are we like looking at Beta Austin's work, what she's showing with her crystallography with water, and it's just really showing that my intuition that they really are one and the same and they're not separate, is really accurate in my opinion.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on, like, if somebody does not have a system like this, if they don't have a Spring Aqua system, what they could be doing instead. Could they go to the grocery store and buy like a Mountain Valley, spring water, or something like that?
Yeah.
Or what can they do to improve their water quality?
So Gina co-authored a book called Quench, and I tell a lot of my clients about this. It's a great resource, and so Gina, I think you should be the one to answer that question.
Yeah, well, based on my research with desert communities and discovering what foods they were using to hydrate, I then created a book with 50 recipes of foods that are very high in their plasma qualities. So that's a great resource. Another place to start is make sure you don't drink a naked glass of water anymore. You don't just take it out of the tap and knock it back. That's just um, knowing what we know, and hopefully what you know after this interview. You want to add energy to that water, and it's as simple as putting in a pinch of salt. Even if you're on a low sodium diet, you're not going to exceed your doctor's recommendation of 1,500 milligrams a day just by putting the salt in. Once you sprinkle that pinch of salt in the water picks it up and starts its own electrical spin, and you're drinking water that now has energy in it. So, between foods and then treating your water with some squeeze of lemon will do the same. Drinking tea does the same. Apple cider shot of apple cider vinegar. I just use the cap on my apple cider vinegar. I unscrew it. That's a teaspoon. I plop it in. Um, Using beautiful fat foods, also very important. We don't think of water needing fat to hydrate, but actually, the interaction between quality fats like, ghee, butter, um, avocados, walnuts, the list. Those fats collaborate with water to be able to pass the signal very quickly and very well past the membrane. So, and they create the membrane with their phospholipids and the fatty quality of the cell membrane. So those strategies are very accessible, and I use them all in my life along with my Spring Aqua system. I never go on an airplane without chia seeds. They're got one of the highest uh, structured water makers on the planet. They're fabulous, and things like aloe vera.
How do you use the chia seeds?
Well, okay, I'm going to share my secret because this is I love it. Um, what I do with my chia seed, you don't have to, but one way to really make it work is I grind mine in my coffee grinder. or you can do it in a blender like a NutriBullet, and you grind the seed down to a powder. Now you have a powder to travel with, and you can dump it in any water bottle. You're going through TSA, and you have one, and then they got to dump it out, or you get to the other side. Just a teaspoon of chia seed will change dramatically the level of hydration that you're traveling with on that plane. It's profound. So I use this strategy with my elderly mom because she was kept in her residence. They kept sending her to the hospital for dehydration. At the same time, I'm doing this research, so I'm like, "Oh my god, my mom's in the hospital for a chronic dehydration incident, getting an IV, and here I am studying all these indigenous methods." So I sent chia seeds to the staff at her nursing home, and had them put it in her morning orange juice. And of course, that got her through a whole 2/3 longer hydration through her day. She never had another dehydration incident after that. So I am a big fan of chia pudding. I think the coconut milk and the chia seed together do their own kind of conversation. And I love that, especially also for the elderly, because they don't have to get up and pee when they take in water like this. So you're helping them keep those tissues hydrated without their worriness about incontinence or inability to mobility to get to the bathroom and those sorts of things. So these are really practical things. We're trying to bring this science in a very practical way for people that they can really flourish, understanding how we can hydrate with food, with good tech, water tech systems for our gardens, for our crops. Yeah, we're going in a whole new direction.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think in the ideal world, right? Which, like for me, I live in Orange County, California, where we do have like municipal water. So I do a whole house filtration for the house just to take out all the stuff that's in tap water. And then but I don't drink with that. I used to do distillation because I want one more step of filtration.
Right.
And then now I don't do the distillation, I just do the Spring Aqua system as my drinking water. And so there is the, hydrogen side, and then there's the non-hydrogen side for, cooking and, making other stuff too. So that's primarily what I do. And then love what you talked about, the all the other strategies of if you don't have a system like that, what you can do to structure your water. Chia seeds are super inexpensive, so I think that's a great strategy for people to use and just throw a teaspoon of that in their water. Very easy. And then fruits and vegetables, right, have are structured water. They structure it themselves.
Thank
So
you,
I think
nature.
yeah, and it's almost like you can throw, obviously if you give them like the best quality water, you feed them structured water, they would be better. But even without it, they do it themselves too, and so feel confident that when you are eating fruits and vegetables, you are getting structured water. So I think in an ideal world, that's how you would do it. But any thoughts on like like buying spring water from a store? Is that necessary? Is there value to that? Is it is it actually, structured water? Is it actually a spring water? Do we have concerns over that, with when people are buying spring water from a store?
Well, I hear, I get reports on what companies are getting contaminants and so forth. Um, you have to kind of watch for that. But I find Mountain Valley also, it's just an excellent water. If you're going to go there, certainly make your baby's formula with it if that's what you're doing. Like we have to, do something there. But yeah, spring water is, I buy it when I'm traveling in the car. I'll have, if I don't have chia seeds with me, I'll stop at a gas station. Although I'm really particular these days, I do not buy anything in plastic. I can't. I go there. I stand in front of the refrigerator, these huge coolers, and I'm like, "There's nothing here I can buy. I'm so sorry. I'm just going to get back in the car and keep going." but spring water in glass bottles generally has a much higher value.
Good, very good.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I know a lot of customers that I've worked with, they like the Mountain Valley. I did a Mountain Valley subscription for a little while, before I bought this house, and it does get expensive. And so when you're looking at a water system, there is that initial investment. But like our top product has a 15-year warranty, and we did all the breakdown on the cost benefit, and it ends up being like 55 cents a gallonish, somewhere between $1.50 to $1.70 a day to run. So when you're looking at the immediate benefits of getting this type of hydration and the long haul, it can be a lot more affordable than getting a subscription of spring water and glass bottles, you know. A lot of people don't
And
think about it that way, but it is.
yeah, and the Spring Aqua system, I mean, if when I look at it, when I look at the entire thing, it looks really well built, and it looks like it was built to last,
Mhm.
a lifetime. It's just every component is pretty good, very high quality. The only thing that needs to be changed out is the filters,
Mhm.
which is it annually?
So on the wet 7, it's rated for 1,600 gallons of use or 18 months. So whichever one comes first. We do have an analog flow meter that's installed inside the systems that's tracking, so that takes the guesswork out without having to have electricity. The wet 5 and the wet 3 are both rated for 1,100 gallons of use, which is typically about a year, so 12 months or 1,100 gallons. I know with how many people I have in my house, how many guests, I have the wet 7. I have never hit 1,600 gallons in 18 months. Like, it's a lot of water, especially like what Gina said, you drink less, you're more hydrated. And I use it for my indoor plants. Have a 17-year-old cat, 17-pound cat, she's 15 years old, and they love it too. Like the animals really, really love it. My friends and neighbors' dogs will come over and I'll bring them out water, and they're just like, "Whoa, they really love your water," you know? It's funny, my electrician, he'll bring me firewood for my fire pit in exchange for what he calls my holy water. So
Uh,
so it's pretty cool. It's a great conversation piece. But yeah, I mean, you will, depending on where you're at, like say you're in Arizona or Spain or Florida, parts of Orange County, our internal rating system goes like this from a zone 0 to a zone 5. A zone 0 means somebody has a whole house filtration installed, so they don't need the pre filters. Once you start going to 1 and 2, there's a P1 filter that's a customized micron filter. It's really a fantastic filter. It's not expensive, it's under $20, but that is the initial pre filter whenever somebody doesn't have a whole house filter, and that grabs larger particulates. I've seen them turn black. I've seen them. My mother lives in a 100-year-old building. It's a glorious building, but they have the original pipes. The rust, the corrosion that I see in that thing is really gross. And I'm like, so glad, get a filter or be the filter. That's not going into her body. It's wonderful. And then when you hit a zone 3, that's where we prescribe 3 pre-filters. So the P1, P2, and P3. The P1, that $20 one, is the only one that gets changed more frequently, and it depends on what zone you're in. And our system calculates that. It could be every 2 months, it could be every 6 months, depending on where you live. My mom does about 5 months on hers. But then the P2 and the P3, if you have those pre-filters, those will get changed with the full filter change at the time frames that I told you. So 18 months and a year, or typically, unless you have a really large family, or we've had doctors put it in their doctor's office, in their waiting room, they might go through the gallons, allotted for the rating of the system faster, or churches, we've had, different applications. But that takes the guesswork out. It's either or.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and it's really easy. I think with like talking to Kenny, I just love how it's a customized system, right? Like based on your zip code, based on your zones. You have custom filters depending on your water quality, and then also there's also people. At least for me, there was somebody locally who I can call up to troubleshoot or help me install the system
Mhm.
as well too. So I feel like there's really good support in the company. It's not just here, buy the system, deal with it yourself type of thing. I
Yeah.
feel like there's a lot of good support.
Yeah, we have installation and maintenance videos that we recently put into place this year, besides the PDFs and schematics. That's been really helpful. I'd say about a third of our customers install it themselves. Um, Basic plumbing skills, you can hire a plumber, or like you said, we do have a database of recommended installers. They're not our employees, but they're folks that have worked with our other customers, and we've been around long enough that we've vetted them, put them into the system. So if someone's looking for a recommendation, our logistics team will see if there's someone within their zip code, give them the information, and then they can make their appointment. Or our team, if we don't have someone, will do some research for you to find a really high qualified, good rated plumber or contractor. So yeah. And we send a medical grade faucet as well. That It's funny, when I first talked to Kenny, I said, "You had me at medical grade faucet." He's like, "Really?" He's like, "You're the only person who's ever said that." I'm like, just the fact that you go through all of this, like you said, it's really well built. And at the end, it is a 316L stainless steel medical grade faucet. And to me, my little nerd brain was like, "Well, I like that."
Yeah, the details really matter. And I felt that way because I put together I installed everything myself in underneath the sink. So when I was doing everything, I was like, wow, this is really well thought out, and I'm not handy by any means. So if I thought that way, that it was easy to put together, but I also felt like how everything was well put together, so that speaks a lot to it. So I enjoyed that process and learning about it as well too. But it's interesting because it's once I have it, I it's hard to drink other water. Like, I'm very picky. I I bring my water to work, and if I run out of water, I hesitate on drinking other types of water now. I'd rather just wait until I get home, and then, or if I'm not at home, if I'm traveling, I really do miss drinking my water. And I'll do nowadays. What I would do is I would fill it up, and I would fill up water in a big, like, maybe like in a Mountain Valley glass bottle, or my own bottle, like a liter or two, and then I just bring it through TSA, and I say that it's medical grade water,
Yeah.
because I really just don't want to drink anything else. So that's what I would do
I just learned
nowadays.
about that from another customer, and my 25-year-old son, he's a pilot, and he's a snowboarder. He came into town for the holidays. He just left this morning at 3 a.m. And last night I told him, "Hey, someone told me," she printed out like a whole TSA thing and laminated it, and she was all nervous going through, and she's like, "This is medical water." And he said, "Put away all that. I don't need any proof. Put it away. All you say is it's medical water. We know our job." They scan it. So I told him, I'm like, "You got to try it." And I texted him about 5 something this morning when he was getting to Atlanta. And I said, "Did you take your medical water?" And he said, "I did." And he's like, "It worked."
It
And
works.
Gina knows my son Jade. So he just left today. That was great.
Well, you can
That's
see
amazing.
from the conversation that we're having that this is a very thoughtful, careful, spiritual company. It is committed to real principles of integrity, and that means not just the material it's made of, but the relationship around it as well, because we're really believing if we could get enough of us together doing this kind of work, we are going to recover water from the industrialization processing that it's been through, and that will help all of us flourish. So that's the work here.
Very good. Yeah, I love it. It's, I think the work toward the push and strive towards watering our crops, and our food with structured water is great. I think it's going to help out humanity. And then, if people want to invest in their own systems so that they can drink this type of water, I think that's even better. And then the spiritual component of it, which is, sort of like get people connected back to nature, and reconnect back to, our higher selves, which then creates a greater good for humanity. I believe that that is it's much more than it's a spiritual path, right? So it's not an easy path too, because there's a lot of hurt in the world. There's a lot of darkness. And so this is sort of like a little tiny light, but hopefully what's happening is continues to wake people up, continue to spread. We can continue to create that ripple effect, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you. And I mean, water, since we are by molecular weight more water than anything else, I believe that water will be the first thing that helps people wake up. Like you said, with the cognitive health, the 2% dehydration. I mean, that's a really big thing. And the lymphatic system is definitely related to cognitive health and the sewer system of the body and just getting everything talking. But I did pull this up earlier. This is the agricultural devices. Um, and we do have some of the 3/8 model, the 3/8 inlet. That would be with an adapter, and I have it on my garden. You put the adapter for a hose on it and you just water your gardens that way. And then the 1-inch one was for larger scale agriculture, maybe holding tanks. And it was interesting in 2023, when they were testing the 1-inch one, they put an adapter on it for a whole house structuring device. And we're testing certain houses on how that would be to be able to have structured water flush down the toilets and through the whole house. And so these ones should come out later this year, maybe in a few months. They've been finalized and we're really excited. I did take one of these farm devices in 2022 to a wonderful biodynamic farm in Italy where they are DOC certified, so they don't water their wine or their olives, but they do have other crops. And I gifted them one. And yeah, the power of structured water. That was the first video we made in 2022 when we first worked together, Gina. And then we do have it on the Spring Aqua educational video site. It's like a 7-minute one, and Kenny discusses this and just about what happens when you give RO water to plants, like you were speaking earlier, compared to structured water. What happens in growth? There was a 5-year study done, and we talk about that in there. And then the microbes, that's a huge part because that's the harmony of the earth working in concert with humans to create amazing food. And even what happens to the seed, the generational seed saving from plants that were given structured water, they become more vital, they become stronger over time, which is a really powerful tenet.
It's only the beginning.
Yeah, only the beginning.
Very good. Very good. That's amazing. I would love to continue our conversation. Maybe we can even do a part two, and dive deeper into some of these topics too. But in wrapping and closing, anything that you have final thoughts about, want to share with us? How can people, follow the work and maybe dig into the science themselves and learn more? Yeah, how can people find more information?
Well, I will be happy to welcome you to the hydrationfoundation.org. That's a website that we have that has recipes. It has a lot of science on it. It has doctors' results, things that will be valuable to you as you think through what am I going to do about being a water being? How does this work? So happy to share that with you.
Beautiful.
And I mean, there's some different resources. And many years ago, Zac Efron did something on water on the Netflix series, like the Water Sommeliers. That's beautiful. Dr. Gerald Pollack has many books and is coming out with another book all on structured water. Also, Gina, you've been privy to going to a few of the water conferences that are held worldwide. The first one in Germany, which I went to Italy with that water device, so I didn't get to go. But yeah, maybe speak about the water conference and some of the archives they have on their website, because I've taken some people to that as well.
WaterConf, CONF, short for conference, waterconf.org. And you will see really the latest research on water from the top scientists from Russia, from Italy, from Germany, from Korea. It's an extraordinary event once a year. And again, what it shows us is what water is doing. The language of water to speak to every living thing is just jaw dropping. And if we understand ourselves as made of water, we're going to be a lot more alive to hydrating ourselves, but also receiving all the information that water has to give us, and trees and soil, and the relationship and the conversation that's all going on in between all that. So, yeah, I believe that water is the divine language. So, so happy to have this time with you and to share that and inspire people to hydrate and get to know water.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for both of you being on here, taking the time and explaining everything and going into detail with us. I would love to do a part two and to, dive deeper into more subjects, into more things about water, and then also the advancements of what's coming in on the new products with Spring Aqua too. So very good. Thank you both for being on here. And